This is Soul of the Triangle, a public affairs presentation of Action News. Your hostess, Alice Ramsey.
Good evening. Welcome to Soul of the Triangle today. We have a very interesting guest, and one that I'm sure you'll be happy to hear some views from because of the fact that what he's involved in affects all of our lives. And he's Bill Bowdon, President of Exxon Gas Systems Incorporated. And welcome to Beaumont and to Soul of the Triangle.
Thank you.
Exactly what part does Exxon Gas Systems Incorporated play in Exxon overall activities?
Well, our company is a wholly owned subsidiary of Exxon, and we're in the natural gas business in Texas. We move natural gas to industrial customers in about the eastern third of the state, including several in this area, in the Triangle area. Our lines and compressor stations extend from deep into South Texas, where we pick up many of our gas supplies, through Houston and over here and up into East Texas near Longview. I might mention at this point that when I say natural gas, and as we talk about gas today, that I'm not going to be meaning gasoline like we put in our cars, but rather natural gas, that we burn in our homes and so forth. I mentioned we are in Texas. As such, we're an intrastate gas company. We operate solely within Texas, whereas many gas companies are operating in more than one state, and they're called interstate gas company.
Okay, now what part does Exxon Gas Company play in utilities in the state of Texas?
Well, we're one of the larger gas utilities in Texas. We come under the regulation of the Gas Utilities Division of the Texas Railroad Commission.
Okay, very good. So we know that when we read about the Utility Commission's rulings that it affects your company.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Now, a lot of the publicity out of Washington concerning the president's energy plan involves natural gas. And just how important is natural gas to the United States, and to what extent?
Well, our country is probably more dependent on natural gas than any other major industrialized nation. We get over a fourth of our total energy supplies from natural gas, and we have only about 6% of the world's population, but we're using over half of all of the gas that's used each year in the world. So I'd say that it's very important. Looking at it another way, over half of the residences in the U.S. depend on natural gas for energy. The industrial and commercial customers that depend primarily on natural gas employ some 26 million people with annual payrolls over $250 billion. So I'd say that our country is very dependent on natural gas, and it's very important in each of our everyday lives.
Is there a gas shortage?
I hate to have to tell you this, but I think there is. I'd like to spend a moment, a couple of minutes actually, discussing the supply situation in the U.S. insofar as natural gas is concerned, and how we got in the shape we're in. First, let me mention how natural gas is measured. We're used to buying gasoline by the gallon, and some groceries by the pound maybe, or the ounce. Well, natural gas is measured by something called the cubic foot. And a cubic foot, of course, is the volume contained in a cube that's simply about 1 foot wide and 1 foot long and 1 foot high. There are about 7.5 gallons in a cubic foot. This chart, which I'd like for you to get on camera for me, if you would, shows what has happened to the U.S. gas supply since 1960, from 1960 through last year, 1977. And it shows the amount of gas that we use in this country each year in trillion cubic feet per year. Well, I talked about what a cubic foot was. A trillion, of course, is a 1 with 12 zeros after it, but it's not easy to grasp really how large that is when you add those 12 zeros. If you stacked these cubes I mentioned, one on top of the other, a trillion of them, you'd have a stack long or high enough to reach to the moon and back 400 times. So let me mention something about that curve, what it tells us. First of all, you can see that our supplies peaked out in the early 1970s at a rate of about 23 trillion cubic feet a year, and that was about twice the rate that it had been in 1960. And since that time it's fallen off, and the curve also shows that. And the reason it's fallen off is simply that we have been running out of supplies. Our supplies are getting in a short situation.
Okay. The nature of the debates that are going on in Washington concerning natural gas, is this in favor, is Exxon in favor of the debates and the way they're going, or are you against it?
Well, we're certainly in favor of the debates. We think that the debate is a healthy and an integral part of the political process and what makes our country go. So we're glad to see that there is a debate going on. We have some ideas that sometimes are different from others as to how the problem should be solved. In the case of the natural gas shortage, we feel very strongly that the thing that needs to be done most is that we need to remove price controls on the wellhead price of natural gas, particularly new natural gas. The reason I say this is this is what's caused us to get into this problem we talked about, this supply shortage problem that I discussed a moment ago. There's two things that have happened as a result of price controls, and they go back, by the way, for almost 25 years to 1954, when the federal government placed wellhead price controls on natural gas involved in interstate commerce. You recall I mentioned that's gas moving from one state to another.
Right.
Well, since that time, the price has been controlled at levels well below the levels of competitive fuels, and this has caused two things to happen. For one thing, it's caused demand for natural gas to increase significantly. And this is simply because everybody that needed a source of energy sought out natural gas, because when they could get natural gas, the price was controlled by the government to a level that it was cheaper than any other fuel. That caused demand to soar. In the meantime, supplies were being used up of the low-cost natural gas that had been found in places that are relatively easy to get to, shallower depths. So we had two things happening, both of which were contributing to a shortage developing. And we think if the price controls were removed on new natural gas, it would have several advantages. One of these is that it would, first of all, dampen this demand, because in some areas of the country in particular, industrial users would find that other fuels, such as coal, would become cheaper than natural gas, and so they would switch. Additionally, it would increase the incentive to go out and look for new supplies in some of these areas that are higher cost, such as offshore and deeper water and frontiers of Alaska, other very deep wells in Texas and other places. Thirdly, it would increase the economic incentive for us to conserve what natural gas we do have. It would become more economical to use more insulation, for example, and other energy-saving steps. And finally, I think that it would improve the outlook for some of the newer, more exotic forms of energy that we hear about, solar energy and others, that right now, quite frankly, are having an economic problem getting started because, for one reason, natural gas prices are controlled, one reason among others.
Okay, so even solar energy is having gas problems. All right, who are the key people, or what are the key forces on each side of the decontrol issue, and what are the main arguments? I guess what I'm trying to say is, what are the hang-ups?
Okay, that's a good way to put it, and I can understand that question. The president, you may remember, just over a year ago, on April the 20th, 1977, went before a joint session of Congress and before the American public on television, live television, and presented his national energy plan. And in the plan there were three key parts insofar as natural gas is concerned. One of these is that it would, he called for a slight increase in the price allowed for new interstate natural gas. In other words, it had been selling for about $1.50 per 1,000 cubic feet, and the president proposed that it be allowed to increase to about $1.75 per 1,000 cubic feet. Well, additionally, but that these controls then be maintained on that forever. There was no provision in the plan to ever remove control. Secondly, the president proposed that the controls be extended to the intrastate gas market, which, as you recall, for example, gas produced and sold in Texas. This would be the first, and it would be, I think, moving down a path that has not proven successful in the last 24 years, at least insofar as the interstate gas market is concerned. So this caused us some real concern.
All right. What would happen, or what do you think would happen to the price of new gas, the supplies rather, if it's decontrolled?
Well, insofar as the price of new gas is concerned, we think it would probably go up about 50 cents. And I say that for this reason. I mentioned that the current regulated price for new interstate gas is at about $1.50 per 1,000 cubic feet. That's the highest price that new gas is allowed to be sold at in interstate market when it's found. The present uncontrolled price or free market price of gas in Texas, for example, intrastate gas, is about $2. So we would be talking about perhaps 50 cents, but the important point to make it on that is that this would only apply to the new gas, and so we would not see any increase in the average price of gas for some time down the road, simply because it would only be after substantial new supplies were added that it would cause the average price to go up.
Okay, so we can look for that increase, and I'm sure.
Well, we would like to think that we would get the price deregulated as the debate, as you described, goes on in Washington. I might add that that debate has reached a crucial point recently, following the president's proposals that he made a year ago last April. Both the House and the Senate passed bills dealing with natural gas. The House passed a bill in August, and it pretty well followed along the lines of the president's proposal, except in a couple of areas it was more severe insofar as we in the gas industry are concerned. The Senate, on the other hand, passed its bill in a couple of months later in October, and it followed a path almost directly opposite from that of the House bill in terms of how it would go about solving the problem. The Senate bill, known as the Pearson-Benson bill, would decontrol the price of new gas in a period of from 2 to 5 years, depending on whether it was found onshore or offshore. And in the meantime, it would allow the price to rise to the level of competitive fuel. So it would, and it had no provision for extending these price controls to the intrastate market, such was the case with the House.
Okay. As president of Exxon Gas Systems Incorporated, what do you think of the president's stand on gas price deregulation?
Well, the president, when he was campaigning for the office, indicated that he would support deregulation and decontrol of new gas prices. He wrote a letter to Governor Briscoe and to Governor Bowdon of Oklahoma. Those are two that I'm familiar with simply because they've received quite a bit of publicity since the campaign, in which he did pledge to do just that. We were, in the industry, were disappointed that when the president presented his plan to the Congress a year ago and to the people, that it not only did not include a provision or a proposal for decontrol, but rather that it would extend controls to the intrastate market. Now, more recently, the president has said that he could support a phased-in decontrol, and that if the House and Senate conference, which was formed to try to come up with a compromise settlement to these two bills, which were so different, that if they could come up with a compromise that would allow for a period of time for the price to phase into a decontrol, and then he would support it. So we think that he would sign it if a compromise is reached.
Okay, you mentioned Senator Benson a few minutes ago. Is he more or less going along with the gas companies and trying to get the prices decontrolled so that it will make it better for the consumer?
Well, I think that he would prefer that it be put in the latter fashion, that he's doing it for the benefit of the consumer, and we agree with that it would be in the benefit of the consumer. Now, slowly
phased in rather than immediately.
Well, yes, the question of how, what is slowly is one that the Pearson-Benson bill, as I mentioned, would phase it in over a 2 to 5 year period, and that was certainly one he supported, since he was one of the co-authors of the bill.
Okay, we're going to take a 2-minute break, and we'll be right back with more from Mr. Bill Bowdon, President of Exxon Gas Systems Incorporated. Stay with us. Okay, if you're late joining us, we're talking with Mr. Bill Bowdon, the President of Exxon Gas Systems Incorporated. And to come back with some layman terms and what have you, a very common one, it's an allegation, and one that makes sense to a lot of people in our viewing audience, is that producers are holding back production in anticipation of higher prices on gas, and that it is industry that's responsible for the gas shortage rather than a real energy crisis or shortage of gas. And this is kind of, you know, hard to believe. And yet, in a sense, when you think about it, it could possibly be true. What do you think about that?
Well, it's not true.
Okay.
I guess I could say this about it. We in industry were very pleased to see that efforts were made in several quarters to bring an independent group of qualified people, if you will, to study this question and see if in fact these charges were true. And they are not new charges, and they are brought up from time to time. Recently, the U.S. Geological Survey commissioned the National Academy of Sciences to make just such a study, that is, to determine whether gas reserves were being held off the market by the industry or by anyone and for any reason. And they concluded that simply was not happening. And the Department of Energy has made other studies. There have been additional individual fields looked at. The sum is that there has been no instance when a study by a qualified independent expert has proven these charges to be true. They've been proven false in each instance, and quite frankly, I hope that we can get everyone to believe that that's the case, and we're going to keep working on it till we do.
Okay. All right. We'll remember you said that. We'll hold on to that answer.
All right.
Very well stated, too. Okay, it has been noted today that the prices, oil prices, have not resulted in any new oil discoveries, new influxes in supplies, and there doesn't seem to be decontrol on natural gas prices would bring in any new gas supplies. Now, if this is true, where do we go from there?
You know, why do we need to decontrol prices if we aren't going to find any new gas? Well, I think that's
what's the point in going on with it?
Yes, I understand. I think, let me make this point. First of all, the significant increase in oil prices occurred following the Arab embargo, the OPEC embargo in 1973 and 4. And so it's been about 4 years since then. Now, there's not simply been enough time, first of all, for us to know how much additional oil, for example, is going to be found as a result of the higher oil prices that are now allowed for new oil in this country. I'll give you an example of why I say that. The Prudhoe Bay field in Alaska has received a lot of publicity. It was discovered in 1968, and the first oil reached market last year, 1977, 9 years. Hopefully all of them won't take that long, but some of the delay there was associated with court tests.
We'll keep our fingers crossed on that.
Yes, with court tests, with regulatory problems that arose. But that's becoming a way of life for the industry, and some of the real time involved in getting new oil and gas fields found and developed and on production is associated with these problems that Prudhoe Bay had faced. Now, it probably, more typically, it's going to take 5 to 7 years to bring new fields on. So we just don't know yet, and we can't say that just because we haven't seen a big increase in oil discoveries that the higher price won't bring it about. One thing we can measure, and one thing we have seen, is the drilling rate, the number of oil and gas wells that are being drilled in this country. And let me spend just a moment telling you what that's done, because that's a very good indicator. The drilling reached its highest level in the U.S. in the mid-1950s. At that time, we reached a point where we were drilling about 60,000 wells each year. After that time, it started declining, and I personally don't think it's just a coincidence that decline was also about the same time that the government put price controls on natural gas, but certainly that wasn't the only reason that brought about the decline. It declined until the early 70s, and at that point it reached a level of about 30,000 wells per year, with half the peak. Since then, with the increased oil price and with the increased prices that the government is allowing on some new gas that's being found, we've seen the drilling rate increase back up to 46,000 wells in 1977. So we've regained, we're some 50% higher level of drilling than we were at pre-embargo times. So I think that's the way you find oil and gas, is by drilling wells, and the fact that we're drilling a lot more wells, to me, bodes good for our future.
All right, you mentioned Alaska, and we do know that there's been a lot of drilling activity over in Alaska. What are the chances of them finding more gas, or is there a chance of finding more gas in this country, period, in Alaska, Colorado, other states?
Well, I think the chance, it's a certainty that we'll find more gas. We have, I mentioned earlier, about 200 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves remaining that are proven, that we know where they are, and they're in our bank, so to speak, of supplies. A lot of people, competent people, many of them independent of the industry, the petroleum industry, have studied this question of what are the remaining potential reserves of gas, and oil for that matter. And the estimates range anywhere from another 200 trillion cubic feet, in other words, the same amount that we have in reserves, well, maybe we'll find that much more, up to 1,000 trillion cubic feet. And I don't know what the number is. I think most people will say they don't know, but we think that it's significant in size, and it may be 500 trillion cubic feet, probably 2 or more times of our remaining reserves are yet to be discovered. So it'll be a significant amount.
Okay. Will this new gas that's found, if and when it's found, be put in a reserve, or will it be put out to market?
Well, as gas is found, it's added to the, if you will, the nation's reserve supplies and carried as new gas reserves, but at the same time it's produced, it's put on production as found, so it'll be both.
Opponents of decontrol have also warned that decontrol of natural gas prices will be devastating to the consumer, and of course I'm interested in this as a consumer.
Right.
Decontrol would add billions of dollars to the energy costs. How do you answer that?
Well, I simply don't agree with it. I don't believe that it's true, and I'll tell you why. The thing that's overlooked usually when those charges are made is that if we don't produce the additional supplies of natural gas that would come about as a result of decontrol, then that means that energy would have to be supplied by another fuel, and the other fuel would cost at least as much as the natural gas would cost. There's another point about that I'd like to make, and that is that the average consumer that buys natural gas in this country, 2/3 of the cost he pays is made up in the cost of transporting and distributing the gas, as opposed to the cost to the producer. And these pipelines that carry this gas around the country are a lot like airplanes. If they can, an airplane, an airline, if it can fly an airplane full of passengers, its cost per passenger is only half what it is if the plane's only half full. And pipelines are about the same. So as the additional new supplies of gas are found and put into our pipeline and distribution systems, increasing the volumes, this would have the effect of decreasing that cost. And as a result, it could well be that the consumer would pay less for the gas.
Okay, now what portion of Texas produced gas is leaving the state?
Okay, Texas, we mentioned earlier, is the largest producer of gas. I think it's about 40% of all the gas produced in Texas it leaves the state and enters the interstate market. It's and even the remaining 60%, though, that Texas uses places it at ahead of any other state in terms of gas consumption.
Okay, leaving gas for a moment, and let's go to something else that's come up and might be a good alternative or a good addition to our energy supply, and that's lignite. What about making gas from lignite? Is that possible, and is Exxon involved in tests that might lead to producing gas from lignite here in East Texas?
Okay, yes and yes and yes. I think Exxon has an affiliate called Carter Oil Company, which has been very interested in the Texas lignite as a resource base, and it's interested for several reasons. One, the Texas Gulf Coast industrial complex, if you will, of which this Golden Triangle, is an integral part, and as well as the rest of the coast around Texas, is one of the best markets for energy supplies in this country and in the world. And in fact, it's the industrial complex, if you will, in this area is very interested in finding additional secure supplies of energy and chemical feedstocks, whatever they may be. So this lignite, lying in East Texas, as you mentioned, is very close to these markets, and that's one very important reason why the Exxon affiliate is interested in it. Would you like for me to describe what they're doing briefly?
Sure.
Well, they have about a 30,000 acre lease on a lignite block about 25 miles from Tyler, Texas, southeast of Tyler. And last year they mined 16,000 tons of this lignite and shipped